This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 113 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm Gordon Brewer, and welcome to the podcast. If this is the first time for you to listen in, I'm glad you found us. Glad you're listening. If you're coming back for more, glad you're back. Glad you subscribed to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. So, and as always, like I like to say, I hope that you're finding the content, the guests I have, and the things that we're doing on the podcast helpful. And if you like what we're doing, let me know about it. If you don't like what we're doing, let me know about that too. I just like to be informed and hopefully providing just some good, solid stuff for people. So anyway, I'm glad you're here. Go back and listen to older episodes if you haven't had a chance to do that. But, we're still in the month of January as I'm recording this. And one of the things I notice is I tend to go through kind of themes or different focus areas throughout the year. And one of the things that's just kind of transpired this month is really a theme of learning how to diversify your practice income, but also last week's episode with Aaron and Nathan, I was able to talked about partnerships. And so this episode is really kind of a combination of those two themes, forming partnerships and also diversifying your income. I've got as my guest today, Dr. David Hall, and that name should be familiar to folks that have been listening to the podcast. David has been a good friend of mine, and we get together. We probably talk at least a couple of times a month to compare notes and just talk about our practices and just some of the things that we're doing with these, I guess for lack of a better term, side hustles we're doing with the practice of therapy. And then David's kind of his organization that he started called Psych Maven, and you'll get to hear a little more about some of the things he's doing. But David's going to be on the show today in terms of just talking about how to run continuing education events and about maybe some ideas about why you might think about doing that and for yourself, and in terms of having a way to diversify your income using that platform, that way of doing things, of being able to not only share your knowledge, but also be able to bring in some extra income for yourself by conducting a continuing education event. Might be something that people have not really thought about much, but it's a pretty good gig. So we'll get to David here in just a minute. But one of the things that happened for me yesterday is I had to go out of town for a meeting in Knoxville, Tennessee. And so it takes me about an hour and a half to drive to Knoxville from where I'm located here in Kingsport. But anyway, it gives me an opportunity to start listening to podcasts, and I get to listen to a lot of podcasts, and it makes the trip go by fast. But also what happens is, being the introvert that I am, I get kind of deep in thought and kind of get lost in my own thoughts and start getting reflective. And so one of the things that I've done this past year is I've held a couple of mastermind groups where I've gotten groups of therapists together, and we meet online twice a month. And it's just about a 3 to 4 month commitment to be in a mastermind group. But I started thinking about how I wanted to change that up and just kind of being able to make that more helpful. I think most of what we've done in the past, people that have been part of those groups, I think that's been helpful for them. At least that's the feedback that I get, is that being able to chat with other therapists and that sort of thing. But I really want to kind of change the format a little bit. And so I'm thinking about, forming what I would think of, it's a mastermind group or a focus group or whatever, but really getting people together around particular topics or particular things that they're struggling with in their practice. So, for example, having a focus group on just helping people get their finances in order in terms of their practice and being able to do that, or maybe thinking about marketing their practice better, or just being able to be more organized in their practice and that sort of thing. But anyway, I want to throw that idea out there to you all that are listening, and I'd love to hear back from you about that, and just thinking about what would be something that would be appealing to you in your practice and in your journey that would be helpful to you. Typically with a focus group or a mastermind group, it really helps. It's a good, effective way to kind of do some group coaching in terms of not only is more economical for people, but also you get to hear from people just besides me. I think there are certainly times when you need the intensity of doing just individual consulting and coaching, and I have certain people that I've done that with, and I'm available to do that. But I think the one thing that's nice about doing a group is that it helps you develop just a group of peers around a particular topic or particular issue, and be able to find kind of a group of trusted people that you can kind of go to and continue to have conversations and that sort of thing. I know, as I mentioned with my friend David, that's one of the things that has been just so valuable to me, is just to be able to have someone to bounce ideas off of and get their opinion and to be able to see it through different eyes or fresh eyes. So anyway, a focus group or a mastermind group is a way of doing that. So if you're interested in joining me for the next ones that I get started, like I said, shoot me an email, and I'll probably have something up on the website before long here in terms of a revised application, that sort of thing. You can actually go to the website, and if you'll click on the link at the top that says Mastermind Groups, you can click on that and go ahead and apply now if you want to. There's an application there, but I'd really like to get feedback here from people before I get started. And anyway, if you're inclined to, shoot me an email, Gordon@practiceoftherapy.com, and that way we can begin the conversation to really kind of figure out what people are looking for and what they need and what kind of help they're trying to seek in that venue. So anyway, wanted to let you know about that. So I'm looking forward for you to hear from David today on this episode. He's, as I mentioned already, he's a good friend, and I think he brings a lot of value and a lot of interest here, and just thinking about how to do continuing education events and get you some ideas about that. But before we get to David, I'd like for you to hear this word from our sponsor, TherapyNotes.com. Today's podcast episode is sponsored by Therapy Notes, TherapyNotes.com. And if you'll go over and check them out, they are the #1 electronic health record system for counselors and therapists. They will provide everything you need to make your practice run smoothly and efficiently. And go check them out, TherapyNotes.com. And if you'll use the coupon code Gordon, just GORDON, you can get your first 2 months free. TherapyNotes.com. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Practice of Therapy podcast. And I'm so happy to have with me again today David Hall, my good friend. And David and I have done we probably talk at least once a month, right, David?
Sometimes more, at least once a month, but yeah.
Yeah. So just sharing ideas and sharing practice ideas and that sort of thing. But, I really wanted to get David back on because I think there's one of the things that he's been doing that I think would be very interesting to folks, particularly as a follow-up to episode number 111, where I talked about diversifying your practice income. And David is really one of his superpowers is just knowing how to have continuing education events for other therapists. So, David, welcome. Tell folks a little bit about you for those of you that might not know about you.
Thank you, Gordon. I didn't know it was a superpower, but I like that. Happy to be back. This is you've been very kind to have me on the podcast a few times. As Gordon said, my name is David Hall. I own a practice in Knoxville, Tennessee, which I'm just about an hour and a half from where Gordon is in Kingsport, Tennessee, called Haven Counseling Center. I run a group of over 7 therapists, but I also run an education and resource group for therapists called Psych Maven. And through that and through other organizations in the past, I've done continuing education events, both live events and online ones. And it's a big passion of mine. And it's a great, I was listening to the episode Gordon was referencing where he was talking about all the different ways of diversifying your income. And that was one of the reasons I got into this. And it's been a great income source. And I'm very excited to talk about it today.
Yes. And so, I guess one of the questions that might come up for people as we just kind of go ahead and dive into this is, probably I think there might be a lot of people that might be kind of suffering from a little bit of imposter syndrome and thinking maybe they might not have what it takes to do a continuing education event. In other words, they don't feel like they have the credentials or the cloud or whatever, that sort of thing. You want to address that maybe first with people just around?
Sure. It was definitely something that I suffered from. And I could tell you, one of the things that people ask me about this is, if you were starting this journey again of doing continuing education events as a business venture, what would I do differently? And one of the first things I say is I would have started doing it earlier. I waited till I had been a therapist for a few years and I finished my doctoral program, and I hadn't had the idea to do these at the very beginning of my career, but I did start thinking about it a good deal before I started doing them. And in my mind, I needed enough credentials, and I was finishing a doctoral program at the time, but I've been a working therapist before with my master's degree. And I thought, well, I need to get to that level of credentialing. And if I was starting this over again, I would have started as a new graduate. And because I had this idea that I had to be an expert, but once you more credentialed or more like, you never necessarily feel like an expert. And doing trainings for therapists doesn't always have to come from a place of expertise. Like some people, if I'm interested in trauma and I'm going to listen to somebody like Vanderkolk or like, it makes sense in certain instances and that's definitely some of the premium priced CE events. But for a lot of things, I tell the story a lot. The first paid CE event I put on independently was on ethics. And that's where Gordon and I met. It was in 2012. He was the first person that ever paid me for a CE event. Gordon was the first person to sign up for the event, and we never met before. But it was on ethics. I wasn't this ethics expert at the time, but I knew it was going to be a high demand topic, and I decided that okay, I'm going to figure it out. And if you come in with the right attitude, like to come in and say, I'm not necessarily the expert on this topic, but I'm really interested in this topic. I've talked about this with Gordon before. I don't like presenting myself as an expert about anything. I like being an enthusiast. And to say, you don't need to be an expert on lots of topics to do a good CE event for it. But if you have enthusiasm and you're open in the process, and the other thing is in putting together CE events, that's what's made me an expert for a lot of things, is doing the work and doing the research and preparing for the events. And so, but as long as you don't present yourself in a false way, you can be a brand new therapist and just say, hey, I'm really enthusiastic about trauma work. I'm really enthusiastic about social media. And here's a presentation I've put together on it. Here's some great resources and some references in it. And are some people going to be questioning you in it? Absolutely. But I'm also been a therapist now for over 15 years. I've been doing CE events really regularly. I still get regular feedback from people, not like a large number of people, but people who come to my events. Everyone, there's always some feedback form I get that will say like, this wasn't very good, or this isn't, it's usually rare.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just a statistical inevitable that you're going to have people that don't think you're good enough.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it should keep you from putting your stuff out there.
Right. Yeah. And as you talked about, I mean, really, if you think about it, most all of us have done like class presentations at some point or another. And what it required is for you to do the research and gather the knowledge. And the thing about a CE event is a lot of times it might not be that you've got like this new technique, therapeutic technique, or this new theory, this huge kind of research-driven thing. It just might just be something that has worked for you that you want to share and to be able to put out there to people. I mean, again, just thinking about, kind of that imposter syndrome kind of thing. Again, I was just thinking back again to something that David and I have been involved in with the Tennessee Marriage and Family Therapy Association, putting together a conference like that. And you have these breakout sessions that you do. And a lot of times those are being conducted by graduate students and just sharing what they've researched and what they've learned in their studies, that sort of thing. So, yeah. So,
there's a lot of, and it's really interesting. I love a lot of graduate student presentations because they bring a lot of enthusiasm oftentimes.
Right.
And oftentimes they're bringing up research that may be new or things that somebody who's more an established expert in the field may be less looking for what's new or dynamic and all that. So again, there's it's not that expertise is bad. It's just not a requirement. And if you have enthusiasm and a certain competence, you can do this.
Right. So let's jump into, okay, if somebody is interested in doing a CE event type of thing, what's the place they start, and just kind of walk us through that?
Well, to do a shameless plug, if you want to see events, I've created a course for this, and Gordon is actually Gordon and I are going to be doing a co-launch for my course. It's called on how to do your own CE events, because there are a lot of different steps to it. And in this episode, I can't give everything, not because I'm trying to withhold, but like there's just a lot. But in this course, kind of give a blueprint from, my expression is soup to nuts, from beginning to end of how to put it together. But the first is, and this is something I can give you for free, is figuring out what are the CE requirements in your state. And I actually have a guide, and Gordon will put this in the show notes, but if you go to psychseminars.business, and that's psychseminars.business, there's a sign up there that I'll email you this guide that I created for myself. And then a friend of mine said, like, people would want to have this, because it took me over 100 hours to put together. But it's a list of all 50 states, and there are a few states where there's some gaps in, but most of the states are filled out for all of the mental health professions in the state. The four main ones being professional/mental health counseling, depending on your state, marriage and family therapy, clinical social work, and psychologist, and of their CE requirements for each of those four professions in each state. Mm-hmm. And what are the requirements? What credentialing do you have to do? And the big thing is that it's hugely varied. And some states are pretty flexible. Some states are pretty stringent. And so assuming that you're going to want to do this locally, knowing like the standards of where you are, of what does it take to get the approved, kind of the credentialing process for CEs. And, some states it's pretty easy. Colorado is a state where as long as you can show that it's a clinically relevant event, you don't have to have any outside approval. States that are really difficult, like New York State, you have to go to the licensure board of each of the four professions and pay like a pretty high fee to get your event approved. And then a lot of states will take the approval of different national organizations like NBCC, National Board for Certified Counselors, American Psychological Association, American Board of Social Workers, local chapters of the National Association for Social Workers. These are different groups that provide approvals, and it's usually an application process. Some groups will allow you to apply for a single event, which is the most economical thing to do, particularly if you're just starting. Since I do a lot of events, I have like a provider status where I do a certain fee with an application, and so I can do an unlimited amount. So know where you are and know what's required. And I recommend going to psychseminars.business to get the free guide so you can figure that out. And we have links to the state boards with relevant rules.
Right.
So that would be the beginning to figure out. But I'll give an example just for where Gordon and I are in Tennessee. The first event I did MBCC approval for the event, and that involved going to mbcc.org, and they have an application process to get the event approved. The reason I did that is because in Tennessee that allowed me to do full CEs for professional counselors, MFTs, and social workers, and partial CEs for psychologists. So I could get a pretty wide audience. But in states like Oregon, the gentleman you had on the episode last week, Nathan and Aaron, Oregon's a pretty good state to do it in, because if you get MBCC approval, that allows you to do full Cs for all 4 organizations. So that would be the first thing, knowing, that would be the kind of the first step. The next step is figuring out, where you're going to do it. I encourage people to, particularly at the beginning, to whatever you're doing, put things together, keep your costs as minimal as possible. It's very easy to overspend in putting stuff together. But find, it doesn't, and the other thing is, it doesn't have to be a large event. You figure out, like, what are your costs? It's just like anything else in business, like in practice, is what are your costs and what's your likely return? You don't have to do a 50-person event. It's great if you can get 50 people to come, but you could do a 10-person event, and if it's priced right and your costs are low enough, then it can figure out where you're going to do it, figure out how you're going to reach people. I do a lot of direct mailings, but there's a lot of expense in that. If you have a good, just connective community in where you're going to do things, to put things out on Facebook or to email people, if you have an email list, that's great to work from too. And the only other thing I would say is, particularly if you're new to this, think through also topic wise. If your goal is you're trying to build up, for me, when I started doing CEs, the reason I picked an ethics topic first is I really wanted to build up a CE business. And so I picked a topic that's, like a lot of states, ethics is a requirement. So I knew that was going to be a topic that would have a big draw. But think about, like, what do people want to learn about? Whether is it a required topic, or is it and in our CE state guide, we have listed what are the required topics in different states. Ethics is the most common. A lot of states have multicultural issues as a required topic. Suicide prevention is becoming a more prominent topic. And so knowing those things in your state, I think, will all be helpful in getting started.
Right. Yeah. So with CE events, one of the things with it is, obviously, to do it, you would probably want, unless you're just a very generous, giving heart kind of person, you're probably going to want to charge for it. But just because it takes a lot of work to put something like that together. But what are the different ways that you found that you can kind of charge and make money from those different events?
There are lots of ways, and this is one of these things that someone was asking me the other week. Similar, it was the same conversation of, like, what would you do differently, or if you were starting out now doing CE events, what would you do? And I told this person, I go, this is going to sound super conceited, but I would have taken my course if it would have existed. Because the reason I did the course was because it was, I had to do through trial and error, figuring a lot of this stuff out. And, but there are lots of ways to make money. And we, in my course, I highlight, I think, about 5 different ones. But to give it, the first and most obvious way is to charge for the event. if you're thinking about how to price the event, one of the best places to start is look at some of the mailings you get. Because if you're a therapist in practice, you're on somebody's mailing list. I get a PESI thing pretty regularly, and Summit's another one. Cross Country used to be one, but they were actually bought by PESI a few years ago. And look at like per hour, and because that's how you typically price out CE events, is how many hours of CEs is the event. And PESI usually charges like it's around like $25 to $30 to $35 per hour. That's on the pricier side. 15 to 20 an hour is a good place to start, particularly if you're new. I usually do an early bird. You want to incentivize people to sign up early, and my early bird rates I usually do for about $15 to $16 per hour of CE credit, and then 20 after that. But you can price it, if you feel you can get people to come for $40 an hour because you've got something so great, more power to you. But that's just kind of, and also look, and I'm relating to what people typically charge for things in East Tennessee where I am. You might be in a different place in the country where look to see what other people charge per hour and kind of get that. But that's kind of the most obvious way.
Right.
Sponsorship is something, Gordon talked about sponsorship of the podcast in his, was it episode 101?
It was, it was 110.
110. Okay.
Yeah,
I knew there were two ones and a zero. I just get the order mixed up.
Yeah.
That was something I stumbled into where I got treatment centers because several years ago, I was on the road. I was traveling with an event, and I was setting up CE workshops in multiple cities. But there was a lot of risk because I was going to cities where I had never done events before, where I had no contacts, and would go out and market and do direct mailing. But as much as I could hedge, and I was charging for these events, but as much as I could hedge to keep the events profitable. And so one of the big ways that happened for me was I approached treatment centers because the topic I was doing had a strong addiction component to it. And there was a lot of addiction treatment centers that were interested in my audience. And so I would invite them and they would pay a few $1,000s. And I wouldn't get like tons. I would get one or two people per event. Yeah. And I would always make sure that if I had two treatment centers that they weren't in direct competition. It would usually be like an adolescent focused one and an adults only one. And so there wasn't, there was a sense of everybody had a clear connection point. And for them, what I offer them was pretty simple. I go, hey, show up, like set up a booth, in the presentation space during our lunch break in the middle of the day. You all can give a 5-minute presentation on what you do. And you can have, and this was part of the consent that people had in signing up for the event and you can have the names and email contacts for everyone who signs up for the event. And I put them out on flyers. And so for them, it was actually a pretty good return because, they would have, anywhere between 50 and 80 people who would come to the event when I was doing these events. And their name was going out on several thousand, pieces of mail going out. And so they got pretty good return on investment. So that was one. Affiliate marketing is something that someone who took my course was telling me how he's using affiliate marketing. He's doing courses on sexual addiction things. And so he's set up as an affiliate with multiple internet accountability softwares, Covenant Eyes, and there are a few others. And in one of the things in his course, he gives he gives a chart of, here are the benefits and drawbacks to different things, but he set it as an affiliate with all of them. And it's been a great thing for him because the affiliate rate for a lot of these things can be up to 30% on subscriptions.
Right.
And so that's not only revenue at the initial bit, that's a reoccurring revenue he's getting. And there are other things too that you can highlight. It's a great way to market your practice. If you are a private practice owner, if you do a CE event at cost, but because of that, you deepen your reputation. And let's say you get an extra 5 clients, out of that. And those 5 clients are paying you an average, of $300 a month and you have them for 4 months, that's $1,200 times 4 or 5, whatever I said. And so you look at the math at that.
Right.
And so sometimes the real profitability can even be like in adjacent sorts of things. So
right. Yeah. And I think that's important. And I know you kind of dive into this in your course, but I'm just really looking at how to figure your costs. And the thing I love about sponsorships is that they actually it has a way of covering your overhead of things, and so that what participants pay ends up being much more profitable, and you're not having to, if you're renting a room somewhere, or I think traditionally people tend to think of going to conferences at a hotel somewhere, but doesn't necessarily have to be that. I know we did a CE event at my church one time, and it was they're happy just to have people come and use their space, and not really charge anything for that. So
I talk about that in my course of that's one of the things that was a hard lesson for me, was keeping presentation space, because when I was traveling, I was doing hotels, and there's benefit to it. Some of the big drawbacks is your costs can be pretty high, because there's the hotel space and there's catering. And if you are at a hotel, most hotels require you to do their own catering. And if I do events in like a church space, I can get, Qdoba. Well, I don't want. That's what I like. It's an express Mexican sort of thing, or like Moe's or something like that. But you can get catering for that for way cheaper, way cheaper than when you end up spending on hotel catering. But yeah, it is managing your costs is probably one of the biggest things I tell people, because an expression I've talked about this in past podcast episodes, Gordon, about doing private practice. There's certain maxims that aren't true all the time. One of the ones that I fell into was the expression "go big or go home." No one told me that sometimes you can go big and go home. And I've become over the years a much bigger fan of. I've had some expensive ventures I've done that have cut into my profit margins or made me unprofitable in different things. And I like the idea of the lean startup. And if this is something you want to do, start lean. You can always add, as you figure out like what's your audience response, what's your, conversion rate of getting new people in. But keeping your expenses low, particularly at the beginning, is one of the best ways to keep this profitable.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things too that is just growing, and I've heard so much buzz about this here lately, and particularly the podcasts I listen to and that sort of thing, having online courses or online events is just going to be huge in the next decade. I mean, we're just at the tip of the iceberg with all of that. And I know David and I both use a platform called Teachable, and there'll be links in the show notes to that. But that's a great way to keep your costs low, but also being able to provide quality events. And Teachable has a place, a way for you to create certificates for CEs, and also do the, most CE events, especially the online ones, you have to have some way of verifying that they've gone through all the materials, so you can do quizzes and that sort of thing at the end. So yeah, anything else you want to say about the online stuff that you and I dabbling into?
Some of it is some caution. I've been doing online CEs now for a bit over a year. I've been doing live CE events since 2012. Independently, and it's easy in our minds to think about online of like, oh, it's this great multiplier, and it can be. I can tell you that there's a lot of benefit for in-person stuff, and some of it is just the commitment level that people have for doing something in person. Gordon and I both do webinars, and one of the things that we talk about in comparing notes is, the difference between how many people sign up for a webinar, between how many people attend. A lot of these are free events, but I definitely, if you are interested in having CE events being a a steady source of income for you, which again, if you're interested in that, have the course for that. It is a great sort of thing. My recommendation is not necessarily think as an either or between online or in person. There's one of the best things I've done to build up my list for my email list for online connection is people that have attended live events. And there is a sense of like, you seem more real if you're doing something live somewhere. Particularly if someone doesn't know you. It's a different thing if someone knows you or knows who you are and to buy an online product. But, we generally have this kind of sense of most of us have the sense of pause for stuff that comes to us just online, of how credible it's going to be. The other thing is certain states, though fewer and fewer, fortunately, will limit how many CEs you can do online. Like Tennessee, where Gordon and I are, you can only do 50% of your continuing education hours through. Now, that's becoming rarer. And a lot of states, it isn't that high. Like Pennsylvania, you have to do a third of them have to be in person. But then there's states like Oregon or Virginia or Arizona where you could do 100% online. And it's moving in that direction. And the other thing, too, is other states will qualify differently if you do an event online that's live online versus pre-recorded. So both Gordon and I use for our webinars, we use something called Webinar Ninja. And Gordon, I'm sure we'll have things shown up for that.
Yeah.
Because there are certain states that will say, like, if it's interactive, if it's then it can count differently than if it's pre-recorded. Right. And that also has a difference too in getting your CE event approved. Like NBCC has a different approval process if it's what they call home study, which is non-live. But the first initial event thing is for live events, but live online is the same as live in person. So it is, I think sometimes we can get in this idea of like online's always better. Online is different. And there's different ways to scale online that I'm a huge fan of. But the other thing is I get a lot of joy out of meeting people and doing the live events. And so I am a big fan of the online content, but I also want to encourage people to think like through the benefit of doing live stuff too.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's just a lot of opportunity for people to share their knowledge and just to be able to network with people, which is, I think one of the email that I sent out today as we're recording this was just talked about building partnerships. And, being in private practice can be a lonely place if you're not connected in some way, particularly for solo practitioners, but even for group practice owners. There's, I think you've got to have those people that you connect with where you can kind of talk shop and it's safe to do that without necessarily, there's certain things you probably wouldn't want to share with your employees or your contractors or whatever as a business owner. So I think that's an important thing to remember. So David, I know we've got to be aware of our time here. What are maybe some parting thoughts you have just about thinking about this whole CE, to conducting CE events?
A little bit about just what got me into this is, I've been a therapist for about 15 years. I really enjoy my work, but I'm an extrovert. And, what got me into this was I was reaching my emotional limit of how much one-on-one, because counseling and psychotherapy is a fairly introverted process. The one-on-one time we spend with people, even though it's with other people, it pulls on more introverted energy a lot of the time. And, for me, I love doing counseling. I didn't want to not do counseling, but I wanted, and for people who find themselves, it's not even that they need more income, but they just want to find other ways to spend their time. This was a great, and as an extrovert, this scratches an itch for me. But when I do events, it makes me more enthusiastic to go back and do counseling, and doing counseling makes me enthusiastic to doing events. And it's great. Some resources just to recommend. What got me first started on this journey was there was an article I read in 2009. It was in the Family Therapy, the magazine, the magazine put out by AAMFT. And it was by a guy that many of you all may have heard of named Bill O'Hanlon. And the article article was called "My Indiana Jones Life as an Entrepreneurial Therapist," and he was talking about at the time Bill was making his living mostly on doing live trainings. And I read this article and I was fascinated. And so I went and actually took this course from him that he still does on how to be a paid public speaker. And if you're just trying to figure out like how to do events, not your own events necessarily, but just how to make extra income from doing presentations for other people, or how to get on that, I would highly recommend Bill's course. His website for that, and Gordon can have this in the show notes, is paidpublicspeaker.com for his course. Bill was one of the founders of solution-oriented therapy. Has written tons of books, and he's become a friend and a bit of a mentor to me. And as I've learned more about speaking, and because I hired him to do an event several years ago, and he came and did a conference for us, and we email periodically, and so I've really enjoyed what he's been able to give me. Yeah. So I really recommend that as a resource for those people who are thinking like, I want to figure out how to just present. I don't necessarily want to take on the business venture, but as a lot of people listening to this podcast are more entrepreneurial, the economics of this, once you figure it out, can be really nice. Right. Like poorly performing events, I usually, for a day-long event, will usually pay $2,000 is what I clear. And you look at that compared to like, okay, how much is that? How many clients do you have to see to kind of make that? Now, there's a lot of work besides the presentation time. But there are also ways to get, including sponsorship and ways to get that number up. And there's a benefit to a repeat. Like for me, I was doing that in places when I was going to new cities that I'd never presented in before. But it's always just the same way in starting practice up. You're always the least profitable at the beginning, but the more you can deepen ties in certain places or reconnect. Like Gordon, I don't know how much you've paid me for CE events at this point. Like, cause you've done several that I've done. And so, and the other thing too is thinking about your practice. What Gordon said, like for me, one of the things that really helped establish me very well as a private practice clinician in Knoxville was before I was even out on my own in practice, I was doing CE events. And so my professional connections in the city were pretty wide. Right. And even for the business thing of like recruitment, when I was starting a group practice and was looking for therapists, people knew who I was because I did CE events. And you can kind of make yourself a little famous therapy-wise, at least in your therapy community. And there's a lot of business benefit to that. So, the payoff for this isn't just one thing. And and if you have any interest in, again, Gordon's going to send out some stuff in our joint launch we're going to do on this course. If you have any interest, check it out. And if you're not happy with the course, it's Teachable, the platform we use, does a 30-day money back guarantee. If you get into it and be like, this isn't really what I want to do, or this isn't as helpful as I thought, if you decide after 25 days of having the course material that it's not what you want it to be, you could get a complete refund. So it's really a no risk thing for something that could be really profitable for you. Right.
Yeah. So as you guys can tell, just from hearing from David, he has a way of just really, eliciting a lot of enthusiasm about stuff. And this is exciting stuff for me. And I know David and I are going to be doing some collaborating. We've already planned, and I would encourage you to reach out to other people, just in your own community of connecting with them and spending some time with them, particularly people that you tend to think a lot about. And I know David and I we're planning just a kind of a brainstorming day to talk about our practices and talk about things that we're going to collaborate on, just in terms of with his organization, psychmaven.com, and then just the practice of therapy. So I think there's a lot of, and to me, that's just a good, it's a good segue from last week's podcast episode just on partnerships. And so,
The one more thing that as you sparked this thought, Gordon, to add, for those who are listening to this and like you like this idea of CE events as a business, but you're not personally a presenter, like you don't like, and there's so many therapists I know that they would rather have teeth distracted than do a professional presentation. This is still a business venture for you, because in the sense of collaboration, if you can organize the CE event, you can get a therapist friend of yours who you think is a good presenter to present it. And you can split the profit with them, or you can just pay them to do it, or they may be willing to do it for free if just for the publicity for their practice. So if you just want to be a behind the scenes producer or organizer, you can make money off CE events and get other therapy friends of yours to present. So if you're listening to this and thinking like, I don't want to present, if you have therapist friends that do, rope them in to present with you, and then it could be a partnership. Right.
Absolutely. Well, David, thanks again for being on the podcast, and be sure to get David's information in the show notes. And David, you'll be hearing more from David, I'm sure, here in the future on the Practice of Therapy podcast. Thanks, David.
All right. Thank you, Gordon.
Bye-bye. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed hearing from David today, and he's a great guy, and as you can tell, he's pretty enthusiastic about this whole idea around conducting continuing education courses. The one thing I love about David is he's so willing to share information and share with you his knowledge. And be sure to check out his website, psychmaven.com. And also there's a link in the show notes here for the course that he mentioned on how to start a continuing education course. And just full transparency here, that is an affiliate link, and so I do get a commission when you use those links. Just like to be transparent about stuff like that. But anyway, David's going to be launching that course here again soon, and just wanted you to be in on that. And be sure to look out for an email from me. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my email list, and when you do, you'll get a free copy of my private practice startup guide. I mentioned that in the ending of the show, but I probably failed to mention it enough on the show here. That's a free resource for you, and I'm happy to have that for you, just to be able to subscribe to my email list. But anyway, and I send out lots of great resources with those emails when you subscribe. So, and then if you ever feel like it's not helpful to you, you can just unsubscribe. You're not going to hurt my feelings one bit. So anyway, I'm glad you joined me for the podcast, and be sure to check out our sponsors for today's episode, brightervision.com, and they've got just a great deal going on during the month of January. Be sure to take advantage of that. And you could save $200 on their services. They are the leading people that help people with branding and website design. They are can help you be found much more easier through their services. And also, as always, our good friends over at TherapyNotes.com. TherapyNotes is the leading producer of electronic health record systems for mental health providers, and who I use in my practice, and they absolutely make my life easier and make it easier for my clients as well in terms of using their online portal, and then being able to just streamline our systems and processes here in the office. So take care, folks. Look forward to joining you again next week, and thanks for listening in to the podcast. And do be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. Take care, folks. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.